Welcome, everybody. This is the Sports Planet, and you're watching the Fuga and Razors show here. Greg Henning, my colleague, who will be doing some football games this fall as we do the game of the week. And we are going to be talking some football. We're going to talk about the Ohio Athletic Conference a little bit later in the show. Greg and I had the opportunity to go to the media day up in Canton at the Hall of Fame. And again, I recommend, if you've not seen the new Canton Fawcett Stadium, you owe it to yourself just to go see that.
It's beautiful. I mean, it was a nice stadium before,
yeah,
but it looked more like a high school stadium. Now this is a professional stadium. They're looking to get the Stag Bowl there, the Division III championship. The Ohio High School State Championship games are going to be rotated now between Canton and the Horseshoe. So that's big for them.
And Paul Brown's, it used to be that they would play some games at Paul Brown Stadium and some games at the Fawcett Stadium. And Greg and I, who've went to many a state championship game, are on record is that Paul Brown Stadium, it's not a treat to go there and play by any means. I mean, other than history, it's not a good looking place.
No, it has the potential,
yes.
But it's faded. It's kind of run down. It's no longer Canton Fawcett Stadium. They just renamed it recently. It is Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium in Canton.
Tom Benson. So is that the owner of the Saints, Tom Benson?
I believe so. I don't know any other Tom Bensons.
I wonder what the connection is. I mean, that'd be interesting to find out what his connection is between Canton and being the owner of the Saints, but I guess we can find that out at some point.
Well, his quarterback's going to be going there in a few years.
He will be, and probably own a lot of the records in the process.
I would imagine he's moving up that list.
Yeah, I mean, he only averages 5,000 a year, so So interestingly enough, Greg and I went up there. We did get to spent a little time in the Hall of Fame. It's difficult going through the Hall of Fame and absorbing everything unless you've really got a day to go through there. And the gift shop itself could keep you busy. I mean, just the things that they have there with the different memorabilia from the different teams. So we had an opportunity to do that. We met a lot of the OAC coaches. Of course, we got to talk with Wilmington coach Brian Moore, the new coach there, who comes in after stints at Thomas More, and he was at Heidelberg when I was coaching at Heidelberg. He was an intense special teams guy, went on to Bluffton to become the offensive coordinator, and then he has now inherited the program at Wilmington College, which he's got his work cut out for him. But I know one thing about Brian, he accepts nothing less than perfection. So it's going to take him a while to get Wilmington to be competitive again. I mean, to be completely honest.
Yeah, absolutely. But if somebody's there's no better man for the job than him. Very high energy, knows what he wants, knows what he expects, and I think you'll see that this year. We'll talk more about it, but you'll see the kids playing hard for this guy.
Yeah, I think so. And there is a fraternity. If people need to understand, if you want to get into college coaching, it's much easier if you become a graduate assistant and then you move up through the ranks, because what we've seen is like trees of coaches that will expand out. Thomas More has a number of coaches that started there. A lot of them had Mount Union ties. Of course, that's a surprise. And matter of fact, in Mount Union's press guide, if you were to look at that, which you can see, we have the OAC press guides up on the wall behind us. Mount Union has like 2 pages of former players and assistant coaches who are now coaching elsewhere, and probably 10% of them are in the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just Division III. There's Division I. There's NFL. I mean, they're everywhere.
Right.
They're everywhere because programs want winners, and Mount Union's been the biggest winner for the last 25 years.
Yeah, when I was coming up, and I know you'll find this amusing, Greg, the Division III school that was pumping coach after coach after coach into college and further up happened to end up being Hiram. And Hiram had a great run, and that's where Brian Moore is from. He was an all-OAC performer for Hiram. So We're going to get into that here in a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more. But let's jump into the baseball, Greg. I want to take a look at what's going on. I know you're a big baseball guy. We have not talked a lot. We did talk a little baseball the other morning, but we haven't had an opportunity to talk a lot of baseball. Let's take a look at the standings. Let's see if we're buying or selling on some of these teams that are in the that are in the major leagues. I look at the Houston Astros. And they remind me of the Seattle Mariners from years ago when they had that great record. They won 118 games or whatever.
2001.
Yeah. And then they don't win the World Series. That would be my concern as far as the Astros are concerned. Are they just smoke and mirrors when it comes to the playoffs? And we've seen the St. Louis Cardinals year in and year out. St. Louis gears themselves for the playoffs. They really don't care about the regular season. They're playing baseball to get into the playoffs, and then they play their better baseball. And of course, St. Louis is even creeping back into it right now. Slowly but surely. But let's take a look at the major league standings and let's see what we think about the leaders. And I already know, taking a look at the American League East. What do you think, Greg? Are your New York Yankees going to be able to win that?
I don't know. They have some veterans, but they have a lot of young guys. And usually if you have a lot of young players, you're not going to be able to make that jump in year one. But they're half a game back right now behind Boston. They're leaders in the wild card currently, 2 games ahead of Kansas City. If you talk to Brian Cashman, their general manager, he would tell you they're in it to win it because they went out and they made some moves at the trade deadline.
Yeah,
they made some big moves at the trade deadline.
They did. They picked up the young man from the Oakland A's.
They picked up Sonny Gray. They picked up Jaime Garcia. They picked up Todd Frazier, which people in this part of the state will know.
Yep.
Third baseman, formerly of the Reds and with the White Sox. Now he's with the Yankees, which is actually his hometown team. He was from Toms River, New Jersey. Grew up a huge Yankees fan, so he's back home. There's some good things happening in New York. They started out like a house of fire, and then they cooled off. They played some pretty terrible baseball in June. We're just called the way it is, but they've picked things up in their last 10 games. They've won. They're 7-3. So, but this weekend is a huge series. Starting on Thursday, they have a huge 4-game series in Cleveland.
Right.
Jaime Garcia will make his first start for the Yankees. Sonny Gray will make his first start for the Yankees. Then we'll kind of see where they are because Cleveland, they haven't played their best baseball yet.
Well, they had won 8 in a row, and then all of a sudden they came up against the Red Sox and they've hit the skids, which is, I would say, the Indians at this point last year were getting to that untouchable point. When you played the Indians last year at this time, you just didn't expect to beat them. I see some chinks in the armor, whatever that might be. Their pitching is still solid. I wouldn't consider it spectacular this year by any means.
No, especially now Andrew Miller is on the disabled list. He has MRI either today or tomorrow on his knee. So it's not his elbow, it's not his arm, thankfully, but it is his knee. What will that do to their season? We saw last night, without Andrew Miller, they blew a lead. They blew a big save, walk off by the Red Sox. Because Kansas City right now, starting to sneak up. Yeah, they are. So if Andrew Miller's not there for an extended period of time, that's really going to hurt their chances of winning the division. Now, I think they'll make the playoffs still, whether it's a wild card or winning the division. But without Andrew Miller, that's going to be that's a big loss, obviously.
And then really in the West, it's just the Astros. They have a 15-game lead. They would have to go into they would have to play 3-33 baseball, I think, at this point, the rest of the way out to even let those other teams back in the race.
Yeah, their division's pretty bad this year. Although, Seattle is now 55-53, 2 games above 500. Took a 4-game winning streak for that, but
they're still 15 games.
They're still 15 games back. Yeah, that's a ways.
Let's take a look at the National League now. The National League East, the Washington Nationals are finally starting to live up a little bit to the the reputation and aura that they've built over the last few years, because it looked like they were going to be the team to beat. And they have a nice record. They're 63-42. They've got a 13-game lead. None of the divisions are really too close. That's
a pretty bad division. I mean, Miami's number 2 with a 50-55 record. They're 5 games under 500.
You got to be surprised by the Mets, though. I thought the Mets were going to be, fighting tooth and nail with them.
The Mets fell off the rails.
Yeah.
They had the World Series run a couple years ago, but they've completely fallen apart. Their pitching staff has just been non-existent. They can't score runs. I've been on the Washington Nationals train for probably 4 years now. I've been picking them to win the division, make a run in the playoffs, win the World Series. They haven't done that yet, but I think this is their year. Although a little scary yesterday, Max Scherzer went out of the game with an apparent injury. They don't think it's too serious, more of a precaution, because when you have a 13-game lead, you can take some precautions.
Yeah. Well, and you can rest some people, and you can play. That's the one thing, when you get a big lead like that, and I remember the Reds back in the day when they had their great teams, they could put in the subs, and they could play those guys, and when you got to the playoffs, it wasn't like these guys had 40 at-bats for the season. Some of these guys were at 150, maybe even 200 at-bats. So, you build that depth during the course of the season if you can. So the Nationals are pretty solid. Are the Cubs going to stay there now, or do you think the Cardinals or the Brewers or, even the Pirates are within striking distance? I don't know about the Cubs.
I think the Cubs are the best team in the division. That's not saying a whole lot. I know Milwaukee's had a really good year. I just don't see them being able to maintain that for the rest of the season. They're a year or two behind, but they have played some really good baseball. St. Louis, 2 games below 500. They've been basically a 500 team all year. Are they going to be able to kick it in? I know there's, Yadier Molina. He's, here in this area, everyone loves Yadi. A little sarcasm there. But him and Mike Matheny, the manager, they've had a little spat here the last week or so. So when your star player's not happy, it's going to be hard for you to get that push. But with their track record, if they're able to get hot, that's a team that could make some noise.
I think the thing is, if we look at the East and the Central, and we're going to drop to the West here in a minute, I think it's safe to assume that the wild cards are not going to come out of either the East or Central at this point. They're going to have, if you're going to get in, you're going to have to win the division. And, of course, now we have Los Angeles at an astounding 75-31.
It's unbelievable. If you look at Colorado, they have a .570 winning percentage. They're 14 and a half games back.
Yeah.
Arizona, .566 win percentage.
They're
15 games back. If you look at all the divisions, besides the AL West and the NL East, they would be leading in all divisions.
And if they were in the East, they would only be 2 games behind the Nationals. And, they'd be still significantly behind the Astro. I'm talking about the Nationals. They'd be only a couple games behind the Nationals. So, Colorado and Arizona played phenomenal baseball, and yet they're 15 games behind. The Dodgers have put it together.
There are no words to describe what they've done.
Right.
Clayton Kershaw has lived up to being the best pitcher during the regular season.
Right.
Can he do it in the postseason? Up to this point, he has not done that.
Right.
Madison Bumgarner has been the guy in the postseason when the Giants have made it. This is the time for Clayton Kershaw to either do it or not. There's a lot riding on him this year.
The question is, do they end up being the Seattle Mariners of 2001 and post 115 or 120 wins and then choke when it comes down to the playoffs?
Yeah, it's been about 30 years since the Dodgers have really contended for anything.
Yeah.
Truly contend. They've had some good teams, obviously.
You have to go back really to I would even qualify this by saying the team that beat the A's probably was not the better team that won the World Series that year. They won the series. Kirk Gibson hits that home run. That changes the whole dynamic of things. You'd have to really go back to the 80s to find the solid Dodger teams that were, there as a year in and year out contender. And then in the 70s, of course.
In the 70s, them in Cincinnati, and then the Yankees and
Right.
Kansas City in the American League. Those are some really good teams. But,
Right.
the Dodgers, for a big a fan base to have as much money as they've poured into this team. I know everybody talks about the Yankees over the years and putting a lot of money in, which rightfully so they have. The Dodgers have the largest payroll by a wide margin.
Yeah.
And they went out this year and they got 3 three guys: Tony Watson, Tony Cingrani from the Reds, and then they went. Their big splash was Yu Darvish right at the end. That was the splash. Who was going to get Yu Darvish? Dodgers got him. Now they have two aces. They're going to be tough to beat this postseason because let's just say they're going to make the postseason.
Yeah.
Whether it's the wild card or the division winner, but they're going to be a tough out.
Well, from a media standpoint, if we look at the way that's playing out, you've got the Dodgers, of course, in Los Angeles, you get the Cubs in Chicago, and the Nationals. Right now, the Major League Baseball wants the season to stop right now because that's what they would prefer to have the three big markets like that. You've got the Red Sox and Yankees could both be in there. And then, Cleveland's considered small market. And, I always laugh about Houston being considered small market when they're the
Houston's a massive city.
They're fourth biggest city in the country.
Yeah, when people say small market, what are we comparing it to? New York, London, Tokyo?
Are you just talking about as a media outlet? Maybe, but strictly from population, you can't put them in a small market category.
No, absolutely not. And then especially in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people there. In the surrounding states, they don't have Major League Baseball.
Right.
The Astros are a big draw, especially from back in the day with those old uniforms. People like the Astros.
The rainbow uniforms.
Yeah, they're ugly, but people love them. I love them. They're ugly, but I like them.
Yeah, well, and they attracted people's attention. And you know what? Sometimes ugly can be a good thing. You look at the A's when they had their people called them their softball uniforms when they had the green tops and the yellow pants and all that, but they attracted attention, and that's half of it. And you still got to play good baseball, but that's half of it. So, that is the major leagues. Looking at the scores, we've got Detroit over the Yankees 2-0. That game is, I'm assuming, in a rain delay.
Yeah, they started about an hour and a half late, and then in the eighth inning. There was a challenge to end the seventh inning. Brett Gardner, they called him safe. On replay, it looked like he was out, and they called him out. And then the sky opened up, and that was about 4 o'clock. So I think they're going to do everything they can to finish that game. But 7 innings, the seventh inning just ended. Going into the eighth, that is a legal game. So that's a concern if they do call it.
Right. Cleveland and Boston are tied. They're in a rain delay. At the end of one, the Reds and Pirates are tied 0-0. Bottom of one, Kansas City and Baltimore 0-0. Finals, we have Toronto 5, the Chicago White Sox 1, the Minnesota Twins 5, San Diego Padres 2. Bottom of one, it's Washington and Miami knotted up at 1. And then later tonight, we have the Dodgers in Atlanta. Arizona at Chicago, Seattle at Texas, St. Louis at Milwaukee, Tampa Bay and Houston, the New York Mets at Colorado, and the late night affair, we have the Philadelphia Phillies with the LA Angels. So, I'm sorry, California Angels. I get that right.
And don't forget, in the Bay Area, of A's and Giants tonight also. That's always a big one.
Did I miss that one? Oh, I did. How could I? A's and Giants, the World Series, or the Earthquake World Series.
Earthquake, I remember that one. But, A's and Giants, neither team is that good this year, which is kind of unfortunate because even though they're both considered small market up in the Bay Area, they do have a large fan base throughout the country. So when they're both playing well, that's good.
Well, they're another one I don't I guess Oakland because they're on the other side of the bay, but San Francisco is like the 6th biggest city in the country. That's not a small market.
No, absolutely not. I don't. Again, I'm guessing the media, yeah. But population, there's a lot of people in the. I just consider the whole Bay Area. That's a large area.
Yeah, and I mean, and the thing about Oakland and San Francisco, there's kind of like being in New York. If you had Brooklyn and New York, or the Mets and the Yankees. You could be the fan of, you could live in San Francisco and easily be a fan of the Oakland A's or vice versa. It wouldn't be a problem. I mean, it's that kind of dynamic with that city. So, it'll be interesting. And I sincerely hope it doesn't happen, but I could envision at a point that the A's will. I mean, watching the Raiders, what worries me about that is if the Raiders make that successful transition to Nevada, that the A's, unless they get it, and their stadium's horrible. I mean, let's face it.
I mean, there's fecal material. The sewers back up into the visiting locker room, into
Nice.
into the into the dugouts.
It's a home field advantage there, buddy.
I mean, it's that place has got to go.
Yeah. And you would think that, maybe the county health department might just come in and say, hey, you know what?
With all the regulation out there, you would think something would be taking place, but
will the A's, of course, the A's were in Philadelphia, then moved to Kansas City, and then moved to Oakland, and,
they can't go much farther west. So
unless they go to Honolulu.
Yeah.
But, I guess where I'm going with that is, would the A's maybe, and we don't know that Las Vegas wants a baseball team, but if they do, that might be the natural hook. As we drew the Raiders here, now we're going to take the Oakland A's.
In the Las Vegas, the Area 51s, the Mets farm team is out there. They're drawing. Vegas has a very strong baseball contingent right now, and there's a lot of guys in the major leagues that are from the Vegas area. Bryce Harper is one, but they have a large percentage of their population. A lot of players now are making to the major leagues.
And I would even suggest, I would not consider Vegas that strong of a football town. But I agree with you. I think they're more even, they have a stronger connection with baseball than they do with football. But anyhow, we have a guest in studio here. We're going to get him on, and we're going to talk to Brian Ream here from Washington Courthouse right here. And I'll get a chair for him. They say life is about networking and connections. And I met Brian Ream at a tennis match last spring. And Brian came up and he had a notebook and he started talking to me about the East Clinton tennis players and say, their foot fouls going on. And he was critiquing some of the stuff. So my reaction was, hey, do you want to come out and run a clinic for us? So I talked to Brian, and of course he's come out during the summer now to work with some of our kids as he does with the Courthouse kids. And Brian, it's a pleasure to have you on the Sports Planet. And let's talk a little high school tennis, because it really is off the radar. You hear us talking about baseball, and we'll be talking about football here. They get all the lion's share of the publicity. But, I've gained an appreciation in the couple years as a tennis coach. These kids go out there pretty much anonymous because, you might see 2 or 3 people there. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experiences and, your affiliation with high school tennis?
Okay. I spent most of my tennis career in Washington Courthouse. When I was in high school, we didn't have a tennis team. I remember in 9th grade, somebody moved in from Philadelphia, and he's still in town, and he was a good tennis player. He was one of the best tennis players in town. Nobody else knew how to play except a few people that had their own courts and our biology teacher. And then I learned it when I was in high school, out of high school, because you can't play football after you're out of high school. You'll die.
I mean, there's a reserved few that get that opportunity, right?
And so, so I ran some. I ran track, so then I kept running. But then tennis was what I really enjoyed.
Right.
And in Washington Courthouse, there was somebody, Joe Banks, who ran a program for youth in the early 70s, which kind of created the nucleus of kids that wanted to play, that got good because he taught them correctly. And then they played each other, and then that became the impetus for the first Courthouse team.
Right.
And then it just kind of
snowballed from there. Yeah.
Because then the younger brothers and sisters of those guys picked it up.
So as a family thing that grew, and not being familiar with the area, but my first experiences with tennis is the first things that I was told is watch out for Miami Trace and Washington Courthouse, because they have the strong programs in the league. And, for sure, I mean, they've got some good coaches, that facilities are nice. And you can see that the kids have that tennis mentality because there's a background that they've come up through.
Yeah, and if they don't, I remember when I was playing a lot in my early 20s and 30s, and we played, inner city leagues with
Right.
Portsmouth and Chillicothe and Wheelersburg, and it was just interesting. It was
Sure,
fun. We
sure.
played 2 singles matches, 3 doubles matches. High school hadn't really caught up to the adult programs. But then through the adult programs I was playing, he was the postmaster of Washington Courthouse. It was
Okay.
Lewis Elliott. He was number 1 in the state in 1941. So he's in.
He's probably playing with Billy or Bobby Riggs, Bobby Riggs.
And it was, and he's in, Washington Courthouse's, Sports Hall of Fame and stuff. And he's this skinny little kid in a T-shirt, in the picture with his wooden racket. And I had the privilege to play him, some. And Mo Pfeiffer, who was the football coach at Courthouse, was his doubles partner.
Okay.
So they had but Lou was the best tennis player I'd ever seen. And I was playing him when he was in his 60s. He had phlebitis, but he just
kept on going, right?
Yeah.
The thing about tennis, I think that hurts is that there's not a lot of country clubs around. Now we know in Chillicothe has been lights out for the last few years in the league. I mean, they're boys, they're girls. They have a great indoor facility over there.
Right.
And the club pro, he has done a magnificent job training those kids, and they're tough. But we don't have that kind of environment here. Really, it's when your season starts and the 2 months you play, and then for the next 10 months, you're off doing something else. It's not like football where you have the weightlifting and sport-specific skills that you work on, or basketball and that. And, we tried to do a little bit of that this summer to get the kids
Right.
out there and get them on the courts. And, hopefully we're going to be able to do that in the future, is maybe, like you were talking about, maybe we can get a club in Courthouse and get a Wilmington club and get something where the kids have an opportunity to play, because right now, that's the only thing that's going to improve the quality of play.
Right. It's continuous play. When I worked in Yellow Springs for many years, and Springfield is only like 15 miles north of Yellow Springs, and so they had a clay league.
Nice.
I played in clay, so on clay, which doesn't suit my game, but you're playing against high level
Right.
players. The soccer coach for Wittenberg played there. He was English, and so when his dad was visiting, I get a commentator with an English accent. You miss a shot in the net. He goes, "Oh, bad luck that." But the thing with
Did he want to play on the grass, like in the front yard?
This was clay. Grass would have helped me.
Yeah,
But it's like, but that's the thing. And with tennis, what makes it so great, if the kids learn it
Right.
correctly early, and the high school team, instills that interest, it's a lifelong sport.
Sure. One of the kids that you were working with this summer, he's actually going from golf to tennis. He tried to double up last year with cross country and in golf. And his dad's primary concern was to find a lifetime activity that, he could do through, 60s, 70s even. And Aiden Henson's the young man I'm talking about, and Brian's been working with him, and just watching Brian the couple times he's been out clinicking Aiden, I mean, the improvement I've seen, and he really enjoys it. He really appreciates what you've shown him, the time that you've put in, and I think that's what parents need to understand. And I, as a coach, and Greg's coached with me for many years, if we don't know specifics about it, we're going to go find somebody to bring them in and help the kids, because it's all about making your kids better. I really appreciate what you've done with our kids, and we can see improvements already.
Yeah, and one of the things that has changed so much, I mean, your radio station's an example of it, is the technology that has changed. Back when you were learning, when I was learning, I had a book by Pancho Gonzalez. And here's the grip.
Oh, turn to page 15. You're okay, there you go.
Here's the diagram of how to hit it.
Right.
Now you can go on YouTube and you can see exactly.
You can
how
get
to execute the
drills
strokes.
and exactly.
And then it becomes somebody to critique you, and then you can set up your own camera. You can set your iPhone up on an.
Sure.
I did that some with Courthouse's team. I'm using my iPhone to record their serves, because if you don't see what you're doing wrong, you can't correct it.
Yeah. Well, now, did you work any with Kenny up the Grove?
Yes.
You know, watching Kenny play last year, I mean, it's always a pleasure to see him. He's so smooth on the court.
Yeah.
Hits the ball really hard, and you know, it's kind of like poetry in motion when you get that person on the tennis court that just flows back and forth from shot to shot, and you know, it's kind of effortless, instead of someone like me that's going to be, you know, trying to hit that thing. And but like I say, Kenny is a great player for Courthouse, and you know, you've done a nice job at giving him some help with that.
Well, and it was interesting because to come in, there were some fundamental things that the kids are doing wrong. But with tennis season so short,
Yes.
you can't correct it.
Right.
So Kenny still hits his serve wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
but he makes up for it with his athletic ability.
right.
To execute it.
Overcomes his
You know,
flaws.
He could he could do it better.
Right.
If he changed his grip a little bit and did, you know. And so when he was in the districts, we had a week to work with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Kenny, I'm not going to change anything that's going to hurt your game, but here's what we're going to do. And we worked on footwork on volleys, and we worked on overheads. I said, so here's your net play. So just start serving from standing in the service square.
Sure.
This is because a lot of people stand facing the net to serve,
Right.
hit overheads. You shouldn't. You know, you turn.
Yeah, you're going to be
hit.
perpendicular to the net when you're
More
hitting.
of a
Right.
pitcher's motion or a quarterback's motion.
Right.
But until you learn to do that, it seems so strange. And so we spent, you know, half an hour I was throwing up lobs. You know, he started out just serving.
Right.
And then we progressed to me throwing up short lobs, and then deeper lobs, and then,
Right.
you know, and then his volleys and his overhead got better in 2 weeks.
Yeah, you know, that, like you say, it's picking out the specific skills. Once the kid gets the fundamentals, now how do we tweak them to take them to the next level? And you have a good eye for that.
Yeah. Well, and one of the most fun things, I remember the epiphany I had playing you know, when it's like, oh, it's not just you can't make the mistake.
Right.
You have to play a strategy. So you have to hit the first offensive shot to open up the court. You know, you start to reach a level. If you don't make the mistake, you'll win.
Right.
But you'll reach a level, and the Courthouse had some players, and Trace had some players that were that way.
Sure.
If you didn't aggressively go after them,
Yeah.
you would lose.
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's no different from any other sport. You've
Right.
got to be aggressive in how you approach it. And by all means, I mean, I think that, but I think the aggressiveness comes with the confidence in your skills. Like with a lot of the kids at East Clinton, our biggest problem is they can hit it, but they get into a volley match. They want to hit it right down the middle.
Right.
And, you know, I tell them, let's take it down the alleys. And they say, well, I'm going to hit it out of bounds. I said, well, you're not going to get any better at this unless you attempt that skill.
Right.
And so, you know, it's a building process, and that's why I really appreciate you coming in, and you can see those things from your experiences, which, you know, obviously help kids with their tennis.
Yeah, well, and it's fun, you know, with like Courthouse's coach. You know, Glenn Price is the assistant coach, and he'll listen to me and go, I'm learning stuff from you. You know, because really all you have to do is teach the coaches.
Right.
And then the coaches can
Can just
carry it
reinforce
over.
what you're doing.
And I told him, I said, you know, Bill Tilden wrote a book in 1920 that is still the best tennis book in the world.
Nice. I didn't know that. It's something I do know.
Everything that he says still holds true.
Right.
You know, the only thing that's really changed is physical conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't encourage you to smoke before a match.
They don't. I mean,
Well, there's pictures of the Tour de France where they're smoking before they go up the mountain.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
okay, not so good anymore.
or drinking a beer or something like
Beer,
yeah.
But it's a good carbohydrate.
I was going to say good.
Afterwards,
Yeah, good.
yeah, but not
good-
for high school players.
Yeah, exactly.
and then, but it's the rackets.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, the rackets have gotten so much more powerful.
Sure.
That, you know, I still have standard size wooden framed.
I've got a few of those myself.
and I actually pulled them out for Courthouse when we were working on ground strokes
Mm-hmm.
and weight transfer, because you can hit balls over the net with bad form with the new rackets. With the old rackets, it was hard.
Yeah. Well, and the heads are so much smaller too. I mean, your surface area to hit the ball. I mean, you got to. the eye-hand coordination goes up a notch when you're using the old wooden rackets.
Yeah, well, and I pulled out my old extruded aluminum a couple weeks ago with one of my friends, and I surprised myself that my strokes were there. They just didn't have the same velocity. It's like,
Oh, imagine that.
Those are like slow, but it used
Yeah.
to be that I couldn't hit a topspin backhand lob with those. But yeah, it's, it all,
Yep.
yeah, you learn. Tennis, like with most any sport, the better you get, you realize how bad you are.
Yeah, and I think when you can be self-critical and analyze what you're doing, then that's when you can start taking your game to the next level.
Yeah.
It's when you're don't have that self-confidence to be critical of yourself, and then of course you lose. You're not willing to take those chances.
Well, and that's what I was telling one of the boys earlier summer we're playing, and he played number 3 singles for Courthouse, and he beat
Sure.
me a set, and he was so proud. And then we played again, and he was just playing badly and
Right.
losing, and he couldn't do anything, and he's just moaning. And I'm saying, no, this is the key. This is the key to tennis, because this will happen. You have to be able to figure out what's going wrong and change it.
Well, and any sport, the mental part of it can determine. It doesn't matter how talented you are. You can just melt down and start hitting the ball over the fence or hitting it into the net because your mentality has changed during the course of the match. And how many times I've seen that this year has been amazing, where one kid wins 6-1 and then comes back and loses 6-1 just because their mental approach has changed.
Small tweak.
Exactly. Well, Brian, I appreciate you taking time out of your night to come in.
It's my pleasure.
We'd like, hopefully we'll get you on during the season. I know you'll be out watching some tennis,
I will be doing that. Yes.
and maybe you can give us some reports on what you see going on and keep us up to date. And maybe we'll even push into service here as we expand at WZAA and start picking up some tennis matches. You might be the Bud Collins of the WZAA.
So I can wear like plaid, yellow, and green pants. Okay.
Yeah.
And a bow tie.
Well, you won't have to worry about Jimmy Connors or John McEnroe interviews, at least. So
That's true. That's true. But,
a little bit tamer than
and
that.
Bud Collins, he invented Fingers Fortescue, the man who calls let chords. It's like.
And he has the loudest, soft voice of anybody I've ever known, because he'll be describing the tennis match in this low tone, which doesn't disturb anybody.
Right.
But it's like he's talking to you or me like right now, because he had that ability to do that. What a talent he was. But again, we appreciate you coming on WZAA 106.9, and don't be a stranger.
Well, thank you.
Stop
very much.
in again. Thank you.
Great.
Brian Ream.
Yep.
Well, Greg, that was a change up for us.
That was more like a curveball.
Tennis.
No, tennis is a sport that I've always admired because I look at it and say, I can hit a baseball.
Yeah.
But you hit a tennis ball to me,
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to hit like a baseball, and you have no control over it. It's kind of like golf, in my opinion. It's you have to have athleticism, but like he was saying, the mental aspect of it, the mental focus you have to have all the time, because so quickly it can spin 180, and you're standing there thinking, what just happened?
Yeah,
I was up, and now what happened?
Yeah, and tennis is a lot about serving. Of course, we've had, we've went through the Australian Open, which is the beginning of, if people aren't familiar with the Grand Slam is if you win the 4 big tennis tournaments within a calendar year, although they've kind of changed the rules on that even. But if you win the Australian, the French, Wimbledon, and then you win the U.S. Open. Now, the U.S. Open and the Australian Open are on asphalt. However, when you get to the French, which is played on clay, which I can't even imagine, and then Wimbledon is played on grass. So that's what makes that kind of a unique foursome of events. And I guess the big thing with Australia is just adjusting to the time change for everybody when they go
and
down.
The ball rotates the opposite way.
Well, it does, doesn't it? It's on the other side, so that get that reverse magnetic flow. It's probably causing global warming.
The southern hemisphere throws everything off.
Anyhow, let's get back to some sports here. And Greg and I have had this this conversation going on here for years, but recently we're talking about, do you have a favorite sports, and we're talking college football, do you have a second favorite team? Because I'm going to go under the assumption in this area that Ohio State is probably most people's. And it could be Notre Dame, could be Michigan, Cincinnati. But, we each have our favorite college team, but we also have the teams that we follow that help us keep interest in the rest of the college football season.
Yeah, and you can see the colors I'm wearing today,
Yes.
Purple and black, and Mark Scovanner, if you're out there listening, which I believe you are. I received a text from him earlier about the show. He's still listening. Two teams that I've always kind of followed. One is another Big Ten team, Northwestern.
Right.
Northwestern, they're the low man on the totem pole. It's like, oh, if they have a nice season, everybody's happy for them. It's like, you want them to do well, except when they're playing Ohio State, but
Yep.
you want them to do well just because they are their underdog.
No, they're the smallest team in the Big Ten,
Yeah.
or smallest university in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. They're basically the size of a MAC school when you think
Right.
about it. And their facilities aren't necessarily the best. But, when I watch Northwestern play, they play hard all the time. And I've been to many clinics listening to their head coach, Pat Fitzgerald, speak. And if he wanted to leave for a bigger job, I believe he would win a national championship.
Right.
That guy is phenomenal. But he's from Chicagoland. He's a Northwestern guy.
Right.
He's not going anywhere. That's his pride and joy there. Another team, black and purple. Started following them a little bit in high school, and then when LaDainian Tomlinson was there, just because of a freak athlete he was at TCU, and then I started going into coaching and seeing what they did defensively and how they pressured the quarterback, and it's what we kind of started to do. And then when I was at Bluffton, which happens to be another purple team, little theme here, a little purple.
Purple's following you there.
Purple Nation.
Yeah.
Watching them run the 4-2-5, and then what Coach Phillips and Coach Curtis and the defensive staff of Bluffton was trying to do, which they got from Dayton, which is another 4-2-5 team. And then when I became defensive coordinator for you, and just kind of how that evolved and watching what they do and trying to model our game around that, because at TCU they weren't used to getting the best, the top recruits,
Especially linemen.
Absolutely. They would get, what they would do is they'd take running backs. They get running backs because of what LaDainian Tomlinson did. But they would take these running backs, and the ones that, they're not going to be able to play Division I running back. You ever thought about playing defensive end?
Or linebacker.
They bring these guys over to the other side of the ball, and there are times where it didn't look like those kids knew what they're doing because it was so new to them, but they were so fast and getting after the quarterback, and they were undersized. But the philosophy for them was, if you can't put your hands on us, if you can't catch us, you're not going to stop us. And they've been
can't
fun
block
to watch.
us if you can't find us.
They went through a streak where 120 out of 121 games or something
It was
like
100.
that.
It ended up 131 games. They had 125 out of that 131. They scored at least one defensive touchdown.
When you think about that, that's 6-7 points a game that you are going to get before the other team even steps on the field,
Yep.
just based on their pressure.
Yep.
That's phenomenal. That if anybody's coached defense, you get a couple a season, you're really happy. But basically every single game, there's no words for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just crazy when you think about adding that into your offensive output. I mean, it's really a 12-point swing. Because you're taking the ball away from the offense, you're taking 6 away from an offense and putting 6 on the board.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And then the other team kind of followed there for a few years with Boise State because they ran a very similar defense. They're just fun to watch.
Yeah,
What
they
they
are.
did on the blue turf, it's different, it's unique, and they put points on the board. And the way they beat Oklahoma, and they're just exciting to watch.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to go over mine here, but if you are listening and you'd like to call in and give us your input, do you have another team? I mean, you tell us who your favorite team is Ohio State, Notre Dame, Cincinnati, whoever it might be. But who are some other teams that you follow? Or you could tell us you don't follow anybody else. You just follow some people like our friend Mark. I mean, it's the Buckeyes, and he doesn't care about anybody
It's
else.
Ohio State and whoever plays Michigan. Those are his two favorite teams.
Exactly.
You know, and if you can't call in, feel free to get on Twitter, Henning on Sports. If you want to, HENNING on Sports, tweet me. We'll talk about some of your responses and see
pull
what
them up
people
and
have
look
out
at
there.
it. And I don't do that because I still have one of the phones from the 1920s. And the phone number at WZAA, 937-527-6674. Again, 937-527-6674. Give us a call. Let us know your opinion. Who's your favorite team or some of the teams you watch? Mine, I agree with Greg. And Greg and I coached together, so we had the opportunity many years ago. Now we went out to see Ohio State and Northwestern play. It used to be easier to get tickets for the away games for the Buckeyes than it was going to Columbus. So we went out to Evanston, Illinois, and watched the Buckeyes. Unfortunately, that night got upset by Northwestern.
That they did. That was not a good game. That was when Justin Zwick was still the quarterback. That was pre-Troy Smith Heisman Trophy.
And we saw, Mike Nugent miss a field goal, which would have decided it, how many times did that ever happen in his career?
Yeah, and that was the game that I realized Santonio Holmes is one of the best athletes that I've ever seen.
Yeah,
when he returned that punt, I mean,
yeah.
Everyone else looked like they're standing still.
Yeah, it was a video game moment. Northwestern for me now. In the Big 12, TCU again, when I was coaching, we picked up a lot of their defensive philosophies. How can you not like a defensive team that scores 125 touchdowns? So I like to watch TCU. Of course, in recent years, it's been more about their offense. But on the love to watch list in the Big 12, I love to watch Texas Tech, and I love to watch Oklahoma State because they'll put points on the board.
That they will. Going with the Big 12, just the offensive lineman that Texas Tech had when they had Michael Crabtree and some of those guys, they were 6'8", 6'9", 330, 340 pounds. I mean, they're massive.
Right.
Another Big 12 team that in the last year or so I kind of started to follow is Iowa State Cyclones.
Yep.
We have a connection there. Former teammate of mine, player of yours, and from the University of Toledo and Ohio Northern, which we'll talk about here later. They're over at Iowa State and Cyclone Nation, so kind of following them just to see how they get things going.
Right.
Matt Campbell's trying to turn that program around,
and he's done a nice job. He's out recruiting some areas that Iowa State has not been in the past, and he had a lot of close games last year because this year. For him, this is the year those have to translate into wins. I mean, last year they were thrilled to be in the games. Now you got to win some of those games. Then in the Pac-12, I guess this was one of those love-hate things because growing up as a kid, we went to the Rose Bowl so many times, meaning Ohio State, and we would lose to USC. And then at a point, you just kind of like seeing the horse come out and trot around the field. And USC's had, they're one of those top 5 programs all time that produces great football players. So, in the Pac-12, for me, it's USC. Although the love to watch list, Washington State, with Mike Leach's offense. I mean, how can you not like that? And Washington, I've always liked Washington back to when Don James was coaching the Huskies back there.
Yeah, I started to like Washington late 80s, early 90s a little bit when they were playing Michigan in the Rose Bowl. I'm like, well, now that's one of my new favorite teams just because they play Michigan. So,
they beat Michigan, yeah.
Yeah, because, they had some really good teams. I do like their uniforms, the gold, the purple.
It might be something about that, but we're going to talk about another purple team.
Yeah, the Purple Raiders. They're just fun to watch, and their stadium is beautiful right there in the lake and in the bay. I mean, it's amazing up there.
Nice place up there. In the ACC, guys, I got to say, I'm a U fan. I mean, I was in Florida for 10 years. My choices were the Gators, who I just despised. Florida State, I could take them or leave them, but it was Miami, and Miami ruled the day for almost 16, 17 years with 5 national championships and very close to a lot more.
Yeah, it was a run that, I mean, that's pretty unprecedented what they were able to do. And
Alabama put themselves up against that, but we'll see if they can maintain it for the period of time.
Yeah, well, basically 2 decades. And I remember in the late 80s, I don't know where I got it, but I had a Sebastian Ibis
Yeah.
Miami Hurricane sweatshirt. Where that came from, I have no idea. But their apparel was everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere you looked, I had the MC Hammer Zumba pants with all the stripes and.
What's kind of
Miami
unusual
Hurricanes.
too, orange and green was not a common color combination.
It's still not. There's
No,
still
yeah,
basically
there's
the
not
only
a lot of
program
them,
that,
yeah.
usually if it's green, it's white, but they're green and orange. I mean, it's unique and it's flamboyant and it's in your face, and that's who Miami is.
Yeah. If you want to join the conversation on who's your other favorite team besides your primary team, call us at 937-527-6674 at WZAA 106.9 in Jeffersonville. Going down, the other teams, and I've had some interest in over the years in the ACC, North Carolina, and then Louisville has been exciting even before they were in the ACC, and of course with Bobby Petrino, you never know what's going to happen there. Even it might not concern football, but it's always kind of must-see TV.
Yeah, and I always like Virginia Tech just because of, again, they ran the 4-4, which we used to run,
Right.
very similar defense, and took some of their concepts and their philosophies and Beamer ball, they called it.
Yep.
They were always exciting to watch because, again, they never got really the top recruits, but they just played hard and they were fast.
It was defense and special teams for them. They were another one that would, where TCU excelled at scoring on defense, Virginia Tech's special teams, they excelled at, blocking kicks and running them back for touchdowns or, or returning a punt or kickoff for a touchdown. So, yeah, they were exciting. And then in the SEC, boy, it's hard for me to pick a team in the SEC. I guess Arkansas, because I used to like Arkansas when I was a kid, and some of my friends call me the Razorback because of my name. So, that just kind of became natural. And, of course, Arkansas moved into the SEC, and they're still wondering why they did that. But
Yeah, out of the SEC, I don't really follow a whole lot of teams, although I did around the 2000, a little after that, when Mark Richt took over at Georgia. I did really like them.
Yeah.
What he was starting to build, he was just never able to get over the hump. But I like Between the Hedges. I think their stadium's pretty neat. Their colors and their uniforms and all that. Georgia Bulldogs and
there's another purple team that we have a guy that we know through coaching who's the head coach there who have an interest in, and hopefully he's successful at LSU.
Yeah, I think so. He's Coach Ed Orgeron. He's a little intense.
A little intense.
But
And
yeah.
did you see who his offensive line coach is?
Did he hire Art Kehoe?
He hired Art Kehoe, who was the Miami Hurricanes
For
long
decades.
time.
For
decades.
about 30 years, and he got canned when Larry Coker was trying to keep his job. But it didn't work out so well. But
No,
Art
it
Kehoe and Ed Orgeron, we saw them speak in Cleveland at a clinic at the same night, and they're knocking stuff over and challenging each other. These guys are insane.
That Orgeron comes up and says, "Yeah, me, Coach Kehoe and me are going to get a little football game going sometime when we get the Hurricanes and the Trojans." And he was at USC at the time.
Yeah, and he's got that deep Cajun voice. Coach Kehoe and I are going to play a little football. I'm not getting in the way of that
6'6", 270
There's some
pound guy
big
up there.
fellas out there.
Yeah. In the MAC, Toledo. Of course, Greg graduated. Well, he went to Toledo, but he ended up graduating from Bowling Green.
Yeah, I've always kind of liked growing up in the Toledo area, Northwest Ohio. Toledo was big. I remember when they played in the Las Vegas Bowl in like 93 or 94. That was before they had 50 bowl games. And they were on ESPN. And I thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. University of Toledo
Yeah.
is on TV. I thought that was really neat. Never really followed Bowling Green all that much. I know when Urban Meyer went there, just because they were so successful, started following them. Miami, when Roethlisberger was there.
Sure.
Kent State and Akron when they had Josh Cribbs, and then you had James Harrison and kids like that.
And, Akron does have Terry Bowden and Chuck Amato. I mean, he's got an all-star coaching staff there in Akron, and he has done one thing. Bowden has done. He's done a great job getting transfers from other schools. Now, granted, they usually only have a year left, but it has brought the Akron program around.
Yeah, just the Ohio MAC schools are just fun to watch. Miami, Ohio with Frank Solich. They're fun to watch because they were the originator of offense and points. When Marshall and Toledo, the teams that Marshall and Toledo had in the mid to late 90s,
right,
they would rival a lot of these top programs right now for just in their small couple of years. They were the talent, Randy Moss and Byron Leftwich. And
well, they were doing the
Tate.
spread before it became popular for the bigger schools to do.
Yeah, it was fun. You couldn't slow them down. It was just exciting. It wasn't just, here, we're going to hand the ball off or throw it every once in a while. They were throwing the football all over the place. It was just exciting. It was new.
Well, and they also figured they couldn't get the top defensive players in the country. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the fastest guys we can get, and we're going to try to outscore you. And for, a period of time, that worked. Of course, we saw Boise State actually perfect that as they went on. In the AAC, Houston, it's hard not to like the Cougars. I mean, what they did in the last few years. East Carolina comes up with a good team. And I think this year, the one I'm going to keep my eye on because I have a lot of respect for this guy as a coach is Florida International with Butch Davis. I think Coach Davis went to North Carolina, took a dormant program. Of course, they got into some trouble. We don't really know how much that was his fault or.
That was pretty rampant just with regular students and not just student athletes.
Well, we now know it was in basketball, and I'm sure probably other programs. But Coach Davis had a magnificent run when he was 50-24 with the Hurricanes, and so I'm curious to see. He's back in Florida. He obviously has a recruiting base there. He could make FIU a power.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see because with, like you said, his recruiting ties in the state of Florida. He's got some challenge there with Lane Kiffin and also in state.
Well, and then Charlie Strong too.
Yeah, there's a lot. Florida is very talent rich, but there's not that much to go around with all those D1 programs. Right. And you have Central Florida in there also. But right. I've always kind of like SMU. I used to have an SMU T-shirt.
Yeah, the ponies.
The Pony Excess. They got a little. Yeah, they're a little excessive there, but I think they're fun to watch. In Houston, obviously with Tom Herman leaving, they were fun to watch last year. I followed them, but
they through the years they've always had, whether it be Tom Herman. I mean, they had Art Briles was there. Of course, I don't know if we want to publicize that for him, or Kevin Sumlin was there. We had Jack Pardee. I mean, go back farther. You had Jack Pardee.
Andre Ward at quarterback, David Klingler. You had these guys that they just slung the football over them. But they were. Houston was the MAC before the MAC with the spread,
right.
And then it kind of transferred into the bigger programs. But they were kind of the originator with that.
Yeah, and they would take down Texas about every other year there, and that became quite a rivalry. So yeah, the Cougars in Conference USA. I only say this because they always have some good quality players. I don't necessarily hang on the TV to see them, but I will sometimes. Southern Mississippi tends to crank out some good football players there.
They do, and I like when they wear the all-black uniforms. It is a nice look, and they are a pretty good program.
Yeah, they are.
They've turned out some NFL talent last
pretty good
decade.
Quarterback.
Yeah, he was
Favre.
Yeah, he turned out to be all right.
Yeah, he did. And then in Mount West, we talk about Boise State. I always like San Diego State. Brian Sipe, one of Cleveland's, good quarterbacks, which I haven't had a lot of those.
Maybe the greatest running back of all time, which is in the argument, greatest overall running back with Marshall Faulk.
Yeah, Marshall Faulk, whether, no matter how you look at that, people will bring up Barry Sanders, they'll bring up Jim Brown, they'll also bring up
Walter Payton.
But when you look at the guy who could run the football but catch the ball as well and turn it into big gains, Marshall Faulk would have to be in that top three conversation.
I agree, yeah. He's just overall what he was able to do, him and LaDainian Tomlinson were the two, in my opinion, two greatest all-around running backs. Pure running backs, I think Walter and Jim, but, Marshall Faulk was pretty good.
Yeah, he was a good back, and they had a running back this past year who broke a bunch of records and kind of went unnoticed, Donnell Pumphrey, and from what I'm reading, he's going to get a shot in the show. He's not a real big guy, but they're going to find a place for this guy to play at 172 pounds.
If you can catch the ball and run after the catch and make people miss, they're going to find a spot for you, whether it's just putting you in the slot, swinging you out of the backfield, punt returns. they're going to find a spot for you.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the last of the other 5 conferences, as I call them, the Sun Belt, who cares? Maybe App State, because the fact they beat Michigan a few years ago, but not a lot of interest there. So, again, if you want to weigh in on that at any time during the program, 937-527-6674. Call in, let us know what your opinion is, who you like to watch as college football season approaches. Our next part of the program is we're going to talk about the Ohio Athletic Conference, and we're going to look and talk about football preview. The Ohio Athletic Conference is arguably the most successful Division III football conference in history.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you have everyone's familiar with Mount Union. They've been able to win all those national titles. But yeah, from top to bottom, they really have 4 or 5 teams that if you got rid of Mount Union or put these teams in other conferences, they would probably make the playoffs. But, the OAC is so tough. Usually their second place team has 2 or 3 losses, one to Mount Union, and then against each other because they're so good, they're so competitive.
Right.
It's hard to go through the OAC undefeated, and it's hard.
Well, for the other teams.
For the other teams. But then it's hard to go through with just one loss because usually after you lose to Mount Union, if you play them close, you're so demoralized that you were close, and then you're beat up, and then you end up losing the next game, and it just kind of spirals out of control for teams.
If you look at the OAC and you start with Baldwin-Wallace has a national championship. Then we roll over to Heidelberg. Heidelberg has a national title. We've got Mount Union has 12 national titles. And then we've got, let's see, where are we here? We've got Wilmington College. Now, Wilmington College, although they've not won an OAC, does have a couple national titles when they were in the NAIA. So, I mean, when you look at it, they've got like 15 national titles, and I don't know how many playoff appearances between the teams, but just a good, solid football conference. And some people, years ago, when Greg was playing for me, he had a couple of his teammates at Cardinal Stritch when I was there. And it took a long time to break down the inhibitions about going and the stigma of playing Division III football. So, well, that's like, just glorified high school.
That's like JV high school football. And then you go there. And I used to have that same opinion. Like, that's Division III football. Anybody can play there. Well, then when you get there, and I watch some of my teammates go and play and be kind of, then I realize, okay, these guys are really good in high school and they're not that successful in college. That says something. And then when you coach at the Division III level, even on a team that went 1-9, and you see some of the kids on that team, like, wow, these kids are athletes.
Right.
And we couldn't compete with the top team. So the stigma of, it's Division III football, it's non-scholarship, nobody wants, just kids that want to just finish out their careers. No, there's some really talented kids that go play Division III.
And, the OAC has had Jason Tresnick, they've had London Fletcher, they've had
Pierre Garçon, Cecil Shorts.
Yeah, I mean, the OAC puts kids into the NFL. So, I mean, those people who are looking at the option of playing Division III football don't sell it short, because if you're in the OAC, you're not that far away from the show. And, sometimes kids develop late, too. And they'll go to an OAC school and they'll get a look because they're players. And so, Greg, let's take a look here. And let's break this down. Let's take a look at
let's take a look at the
how the media.
So last Thursday, we went up to Canton and you got a little preview of the OAC Media Day. It was interesting. Got to listen to a lot of the coaches speak. 5 of the 10 coaches are in either their first or second year as head coaches. So there's been quite a bit of turnover in the last few years in the OAC. But the coaches poll, Mount Union is number 1, then John Carroll. John Carroll, by the way, is the defending conference champion after knocking off Mount Union last year. Mount Union, John Carroll, Heidelberg, Ohio Northern, Otterbein, Baldwin Wallace, Marietta, Capital, Muskingum, and then Wilmington. And then the media polls are very similar. Mount Union, John Carroll, Ohio Northern, Heidelberg, Otterbein, Baldwin Wallace, Capital, Muskingum, Marietta, and then Wilmington at the bottom of that one also.
Right. So, Greg and I participated in the media poll. We're going to reveal how ours went as far as how we picked the teams to finish. And let's go ahead and start. Greg, who did in the 10-team conference, who do you see being number 10 in this?
Now, this program, especially new head coach, coming out, they have not been successful in recent years, which is unfortunate because there is a very rich recruiting base around here.
Yep.
For whatever reasons, kids haven't been going to Wilmington. Hopefully that turns around with Coach Moore. Like I said, I think Coach Moore will do an excellent job, but it's going to take time, especially in this conference. If you put them in a different conference, the turnaround wouldn't be as difficult because you don't have 8 or 9 teams that are capable of winning every weekend. But I think Wilmington is going to struggle again this year. They don't have as many kids in the program yet. In a couple years, in the next few years, when Coach Moore and his staff get in the 100 kids per recruiting class, that's really going to help out. But I do think Wilmington is going to break into the win column this year.
All right.
I really do. I think week 1 they play Earlham. Earlham is another program that's struggled in recent years. I think that's a great first game for both programs. I really do, because
Somebody's got to win football games.
Absolutely, and they're very similar in their struggles. So I think Wilmington is going to win at Earlham. I think they're going to struggle in the OAC because we said with the difficulty in the conference. But if you can just get that one win, because a lot of these kids have never seen a win in college, I think that's going to be a big morale booster for the program.
Yeah. You look at who they have coming back, and when I look at it, now I had Wilmington, actually I have Wilmington going 2-8. I have them winning an OAC game, and I base that on they have 20 returners, and there are a couple of the other teams who they will be playing against who have fewer returning players. And knowing Coach Moore, I think he's going to be able to bring some players in immediately that are going to enable them to beat Earlham in the beginning and get an OAC win against, Marietta, Muskingum, who are usually down there with them.
Yeah, the Marietta game I went back and forth with. But I think Marietta, just because they have more players on their team, I think that's good. But that one could go either way.
Yeah, and so when I look at the Wilmington team, they've got 3-year starter Luke Credit coming back. And it's been a problem if you've seen Wilmington's football games, keeping their quarterback healthy. And Coach Moore talked to us about it, and he said, I don't care if I got to keep 9 guys in, we're going to keep our quarterback upright so he's not worried about going on his back every play.
Yeah, and they have 2 all-conference players returning. P.J. Meyer, senior wide receiver out of Elder High School, and also Darren Milligan, a defensive lineman out of Carlisle High School. So those 2 kids look to be leaders on each side of the ball.
Okay. So, Greg, who do you have next?
I have both these teams going 2-7, Marietta and Muskingum.
Okay.
I have them both going 2-7 in the conference. Again, programs that are usually toward the bottom of the OAC have usually struggled. Although last year Muskingum was a little bit better. They did go 4-6. They won 3 conference games. Marietta went 3-7, won 3 conference games. Right. I don't know if they're going to be able to build on that just based on their history,
right.
And especially Marietta not having a whole lot of kids coming back. They only have 14. Or what was it? I was looking at the wrong thing. They have 30 returning lettermen. They lost 14. Muskingum has 22. I think that's going to be a big deficit there for them.
Yep.
So, they both have them both going 2-7, but I would say Muskingum would probably be in the 9th spot there.
Yeah. And, I looked at it. I see Marietta, I guess I've always seen Marietta kind of where they are not always... they do rise up every now and then and knock some people off, especially in football, because in the other sports, in baseball, they are actually nationally known for their baseball program as having a pretty solid program there. But the way I see it, Andy Waddle returns for his 5th season. He's done about as much as he can do. I think the biggest problem with Marietta is getting kids to go there. Now, they have upgraded facilities and that, but it's just difficult because Marietta is not, and I mean, I'm saying this is important because some kids look to get away from the big cities and things like that, but Marietta truly is away from everything.
It's right along the river. There really isn't much around. But what they do have coming back this year is a senior running back who was first team last year, Roger Walker out of Florida, who Division3.com has him as a preseason first team All-American running back. So I think it's safe to say who's going to be handling the football on offense for them.
Yeah, and he had 1,292 yards last year. And, so you're playing against John Carroll and Mount Union and Heidelberg and these good teams, and you're able to gain 1,200 yards with probably, it's fair to say, inferior talent to those teams. So, he obviously is getting a look there. I just think it's going to be difficult for them. I have them winning their opener, their non-conference game, and in that game, Marietta plays Geneva. Who in the NAIA days, Geneva was a decent program. That's from, and Geneva's in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. You know what the significance of Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania is?
I do not.
We have 2 NFL quarterbacks who came from that area.
Dan Marino and Joe Montana.
Joe Montana's the
Jim
one.
Kelly.
And actually, Joe Namath came directly from Beaver Falls.
Oh, I forgot about old Joe Willie Namath.
So Geneva used to live on that, and since they've went into Division III, they have not been as successful. I see Marietta starting out that way, but I do not see them winning another OAC game, with Wilmington rising up and knocking them off. And I think, now I have the schedule here, I'm not sure. What I a lot of times think is who's the home team in those type of games, and I think Wilmington is the home team there. So.
And did either team have to play Mount Union or John Carroll or Heidelberg
the week
or
before?
Northern the week before? Because that, in all honesty, with the depth with some of these teams in the lower rungs of the division of the conference, that does truly play a major impact.
Yeah, I agree. So, so Greg's got. Greg has the bottom 2. He's got a tie for the 8th and 9th position between Marietta and
the Muskingum.
I've got Wilmington edging out Marietta. And then as far as the Muskies are concerned, I have them just above the Wilmington Quakers. I have them going 2-7, 3-7 overall, winning their non-conference game. And again, another place that's kind of difficult to recruit at. It seems that in the OAC, if you're familiar with where these schools are located, it becomes a difficult matter because Muskingum's in Zanesville, and Zanesville is out on 70 as you head out of the state. I mean, it's kind of like halfway between Pittsburgh and Columbus. And so, can you get kids to come there? Maybe not quite as desolate as Marietta. Wilmington, I don't know necessarily it's desolate, but, it's 50 miles from Cincinnati, 40 miles from Columbus, and 40 miles from Dayton. And like Coach Moore said to us, that's a pretty good recruiting area.
Yeah, that's what he said. That's going to be his key focus. Is if you look at Dayton to the west, Cincinnati to the south, Columbus to the north, just in those 3 cities, you should be able to find some talent. And I think when Coach Moore goes into the schools and his staff goes into the homes of these parents and these kids, they're going to want to stay in the general areas that way
and give it a shot.
Absolutely, give it a shot, and their families can come see them play too.
Yeah, and Wilmington, and with all these programs, Marietta, Muskingum, the thing is, it's keeping up with the Joneses. If you've never been to Mount Union and you're thinking about a Division III school, and you walk onto the campus and you see all the buildings and what that athletic facility's grown into,
it really looks like a MAC school. It really does with their facilities. And then Heidelberg in the last few years, they ramped up their facilities, and Ohio Northern in the last 15 years, and you can see who are the top teams? And then you have John Carroll, of course. They have great facilities, and B-Dub.
Yeah, years ago when Finney Stadium, that was the selling point when Lee Tressel was the head coach at Baldwin Wallace. They had Finney Stadium a 10,000 seat stadium, and it had turf, and it was the most up-to-date thing in the OAC, and that was a sales point. That's what made Baldwin Wallace the power there for many years.
Absolutely. Then John Carroll, their facilities, and Don Shula, and I mean, you can see why they win year in year out, where they're usually competitive.
Yeah, and that's what makes it tough for people that have to recruit against the OAC schools, even the lower rung OAC schools. If I'm traveling to, say I travel up to John Carroll, I travel to Mount Union, and then I travel to one of the other schools, and I look at the facilities, and I'm paying $40,000, $50,000. And I said to you say to your mom and dad, well, there's not a decision to be made. Now, of course, we're talking from an athletic standpoint. If a school's renowned for its business school, that should be the first reason if you're going to Division III.
Absolutely, because the chance of a Division I player making the NFL is small, but Division III, it's almost non-existent. So
right.
if you're trying to decide between two schools, in Division III, you should be choosing the highest academics based on what career you plan to pursue.
Right. Okay, Greg. So we've established that we both agree that Wilmington, Marietta, and Muskingum are going to be in the lower tier of the league. Who do you have finishing in the which would be the 7th position?
It's a purple team.
Well, in this league, it's not hard to do that.
No, there's a couple of them. The Capitol Crusaders. They had a stretch run a few years back where they were competitive. They just couldn't quite get over the hump. I know last year they went 4-6, 4-5 in the conference. This year I think they're going to be similar. I have them at 3-7 overall and 3-6 in the conference. They do have 53 returning lettermen, and they lose 19. But they have some. When I looked at it and what they have returning, they only have 2 all-conference players returning. So that's going to hurt them. One was a freshman last year. David Barnett was a second-team wide receiver.
Right.
And then Zach Kennedy was a second-team offensive lineman. So those are the only 2 kids they've returning that were all-conference. And I think it's just going to be a little bit of a struggle for Coach Rogaszewski and the Capitol Crusaders.
Yeah, and the thing is and there'll be another school that we talk about here in a minute in the Columbus area. Columbus being like Cleveland or Cincinnati, if you're right in that area, especially in the suburban area, if you've never been to Capitol, stop by sometime when you get up there near the Bexley area of the city. Capitol is a very nice school, and they don't stay down very long, but right now they're in a bottom part of the cycle. The league is up, and they just don't have the horses right now. And I agree with you, Greg. I've got them finishing 7th. I've got them 3-6 in the league and 4-6 overall. They do have Thomas Weebler coming back. He's from Sanesville. He's quarterback who threw for just under 1,500 yards and had a 10-4 touchdown interception ratio. So he didn't play the whole season, but at least you have that. If you've got a signal caller who's productive and he's coming back, if you can surround him with some players, and you never know about freshmen. A lot of them take the midnight train during the 2-a-day practices. And if you're not familiar with that, there's kind of like a joke amongst coaches is when a player just disappears. They go to their room and everything's gone, and they've just decided that Division III football is not for them.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing until I was coaching, like I said, at Bluffton. And one of my linebackers, one day they said, where is he? And the kids started laughing. I said, what'd you do, lock him in the closet or something? They go, no, Coach, he called Mom and he went home. Okay, all right, that was new to me, but they said, Coach, it happens every year with at least a couple of kids.
And, pretty common that stuff happens. But anyhow, Capitol will be back, but they're just not in that situation right now. Now, if we take a look at who do you have next, Greg?
In the number 5 spot, I have 2 teams. Baldwin Wallace, I have a 4-5 in the conference, and Otterbein at 4-5 in the conference.
Okay.
I know Baldwin Wallace last year went 2-7 in the conference, 3-7 overall. That's not okay for Baldwin Wallace. That will be turned around. Again, I think they're kind of in a down cycle. They returned 36 players. Coach Jim Hilbert, he'll be in his first year. with BW, but I have them. Baldwin Wallace and Otterbein, I think, are just a step below the second-tier teams in the conference. I think they're above the bottom teams currently, but they're a step or two below the top teams.
Yeah, and Otterbein, of course, is in Westerville, which is another suburb of Columbus. They've got very nice facilities there too. It's a good program. They're just in that middle right now. You know, they've not been able to break through. But if you know anything about the OAC, we see teams for a while. Mountain Union's main competition was Otterbein, and then it was Capital, and then Ohio Northern, and so these teams have all taken their best shots at Mount Union over the years, and it's actually helped them because it's dragged them into the playoffs. But they have all first team all OAC quarterback Logan Stepp coming back, and he's a dual threat quarterback. He had 268.7 yards a game last year, 1,900 passing, and 17 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions. So a good guy to circle the wagons with. They've got a two-headed monster running back with Christian Johnson and Isaiah Richmond returning to the backfield. So, there's some components there. Again, I don't know that it's enough to get over the hump. And I've got them finishing in 6th at 3-6. I'm sorry, 4-5, and then 4-6 overall. You talked about Baldwin Wallace. Here's where my problem is with these next 3 teams. I see them pretty close. I think Jim Hilvert will bring BW back with vengeance. And I'm looking at Heidelberg, BW, and Ohio Northern. And the way I deciphered this is I looked at who had who on the road. And Heidelberg, unfortunately, has both BW and Ohio Northern on the road. So I saw Heidelberg finishing just behind those two. And that doesn't mean they couldn't upset them. Baldwin Wallace has been... to an extent, Baldwin Wallace is always a little bit of a rival. They're relatively close to Heidelberg, as is Ohio Northern. So those 3 teams have a little bit of cattiness when they get together. So I see Heidelberg finishing in the 6th position with Baldwin Wallace at just above them, and Ohio Northern just above them. I've got Heidelberg at 5-4, 6-4 overall. I've got BW 6-3, 7-3 overall, and I have Ohio Northern at 7-2 and 8-2 overall. So, when we take a look at those teams, Coach Hilvert was one of those that we talked about who came through that coaching fraternity through Thomas More. Coached with Brian Moore. He coached with Mike Hallett, who was Heidelberg's coach. They all came up through there. Coach Hilvert also was a successful high school coach at Cincinnati LaSalle, where he won back-to-back state titles. And so he's not unfamiliar with high school football in Ohio.
Yeah, he doesn't take losing very well. Everywhere he's gone, he's been part of a winning program, and I agree. I think that's going to come back. That's why I have them about 500. I think this will be a step toward it, and I think next year, or the following year, 2018-19, I think that's when they're going to take off again.
They'll be contenders. Yeah, and they've got some, they lose, they have 36 returning lettermen. They only lose 14. So depending on the attitude of these guys, their defensive line returns an all OAC defensive end from 2015, Andy Schultz. He can be the leader, catalyst for that defense, bring them back around. So I think that, BW, like you're saying, Greg, are they going to step up and they're going to play with John Carroll or Mount Union this year? I don't necessarily see that. But like I say, I think there's that tier of teams right in the middle there between Heidelberg and BW and Ohio Northern. I see those teams battling it out for those middle positions right underneath the top 2 teams.
Yeah, I have, when you talk about that clump of teams, I have Heidelberg Northern. I have John Carroll in that clump below Mount Union, because I have them all 8-2 and 7-2, because really it could go. I really think it could go any way. And if BW gets some confidence, they could be right there too. And that's the problem that the OAC has, is you have Mount Union probably going to go 10-0 most years.
Right.
Then you have Heidelberg, John Carroll, Ohio Northern, Baldwin Wallace, sometimes Otterbein, sometimes Capital. You have this 5-6 teams where they're going to go about 500 because they beat each other, and it's just hard. And that's why it's hard for the OAC sometimes to get two teams into the playoffs, is because
they got multiple losses.
Yeah, and you just can't put multiple lost teams into the playoffs, and I understand that. And so there's just that, like you said, a chunk of teams that any of them could win on any weekend.
And if you're not familiar with the locations of BW and John Carroll, they're both in Cleveland, one on the east side, one on the west side. And when the teams are both good, well, even when they're not good, but when they're both good, that's a high-quality football game there. So, that I'm sure Jim Hilvert knows that. And they have a new coach. Tom Arth left John Carroll after winning the OAC. He parlayed that into a different job. Rick Finotti, who had won state championships at Lakewood St. Edwards.
It's a good hire. You got a guy that's been able to, as a Catholic school, bring kids in. I don't want to use the R word, the recruiting word, but he's been able to bring kids into St. Ned's, and I think he's going to be able to do the same thing at John Carroll, especially being another Catholic school where he's what he's familiar with. He's going to continue this trend, and he worked at the University of Michigan,
and I believe he's a recruiting coordinator there, I think.
Absolutely. So the guy, he's a good salesman.
Right.
He's been able to do that for years, and I think that's going to continue over at JCU.
Now, we were able to see Mason McKendrick, their linebacker, at the OAC meetings. An impressive young man.
Yeah, he is enormous. He looks like a defensive end, a D1, almost a D1 defensive end, how big he is. Very well-spoken when he was up there, and very well thought. Had a lot of good things to say. But yeah, he's a returning first-team All-American. He's a preseason first-team All-American, and this won't surprise you. He's from Menor. They've had some good teams.
Some pretty good players.
Also, they have Ray Brown, a junior from St. Ignatius High School, returning. He was a 2016 honorable mention All-American. Now he's a first-team preseason All-American. They have a first-team All-Conference running back, second-team All-Conference running back, second-team All-Conference linebacker from Menor Lake Catholic.
Yes.
So if you look at the kids that they have, their top players, Gates Mills Gilmore Academy, St. Ignatius, Menor, Kirtland, and Menor Lake Catholic.
Yeah, and if you think about this, Mason McKendrick played on those state champion, well, they weren't champions, runner-up teams that Mitch Trubisky played on. Mm-hmm. So they were teammates with the Chicago Bears' potential starting quarterback this year. So
yeah, John Carroll's pretty loaded.
Yeah. McKendrick also was the reigning D3Football.com Northern Regional Defensive Player of the Year. So
yeah, his stats were pretty phenomenal. I can't imagine trying to block that kid. Yeah. He was pretty good.
And so, I think the big thing for them, for John Carroll, I've got them going 8-1, 9-1 overall. And I'm with a little trepidation about that 8-1 because they start out with Wisconsin Oshkosh.
It's a rematch.
Yes, it's a rematch, which they lost last year.
Yeah, and that trepidation is kind of why I have Heidelberg a little bit above them, and the returning players Heidelberg has on defense. They return two first-team defensive linemen, second-team defensive lineman, a second-team defensive back. Their defense is going to be loaded this year, and I think that's going to be one of the key components to shutting down some of these high-flying offenses that they'll see.
Yeah, and Scott Donaldson, who took over, was the defensive coordinator when I was coaching at Heidelberg. He's kept the program humming, and Scott will do a good job. And like you say, they've got a good defense, and if they're able to put together some offensive production, you got to believe that they're going to have a good shot at finishing in the money and maybe getting into a playoff position.
Yeah, their defense is going to lead them, but like you said, their schedule, their schedule is difficult this year. Facing some of these teams on the road, it's going to be a challenge. But you hear the phrase defense travels. Sometimes your offense is going to have a bad day, but usually if your defense is good, it's good no matter where you play.
Yeah, and of course they've put the finishing touches on their new stadium there in Tiffin, Ohio. If you ever get a chance, it is a beautiful setting for where Heidelberg plays. Nice place to go to school. I would recommend anybody who's looking, at college options that that would be something that you want to take a visit over there. So that would be Heidelberg University. And then, of course, now we get to, we talked a little bit about John Carroll. They open up with Wisconsin Oshkosh. They have a new head coach. And for them to have a successful season again, in their eyes, they're going to have to beat the Mount Union Purple Raiders.
I don't know if you can do that 2 years in a row, because we've seen when in 2004 Mount Union traveled to Ohio Northern, and Northern gave them all they could handle, and I'm losing by 14. The next year, Northern went to Mount Union, beat them 21-14. The following year, I don't remember the score, but Mount Union beat them by 6 or 7 touchdowns. So when you beat Mount Union, they usually come back with a vengeance, and they put the hammer down, and they don't let go.
Yeah, and we've seen Mount Union take really, really good players in the OAC and make them very ordinary. I mean, I have, as a staff, when Larry Karras was there and Vince Karras, of course, took over, his son just picked up where his dad left off. They have a very unique way to be able to neutralize key players.
Yeah, and that's the thing. John Carroll, Heidelberg, Northern, BW, these programs, they have a couple of really good players. Mount Union has so many talented kids that you can't key on one of them, but they can key on your one player and neutralize him. And they even did that with Jason Trusnick, who went to the NFL and played several years in the show. He didn't have the greatest game against them because what he was going up against.
Jason Lewis had a pretty
Jason Lewis was pretty good. But yeah, they're just able to key on that one guy and stop him. They say, okay, well, if you guys are good enough to beat me, then so be it. But it's not even 99% because their winning percentage is higher than that. But you can't do it. It just doesn't happen that often. So going 12-2 last year, not winning the OAC, not winning the national championship, not even getting to the Stag Bowl.
First time in 11 years that they hadn't participated in national championship.
I can't imagine what Mount Union is set to do to people this year. They're going to be coming back with a vengeance.
Yeah, I would say that what we're going to see is, I think that Mount Union does have a couple question marks. They return 3 quarterbacks who vie for that starting position, and I think that's going to be the thing. Is a quarterback play has always been the linchpin for Mount. When Mount has great quarterback play, like when they had Bill Borchert, and they had the Ballard kid, Jim Ballard, and then they had the Schmier kid from Upper Sandusky, they would win multiple national championships back to back to back, or Schmeck kid, I'm sorry. And so, if Mount finds that quarterback, and of course, let's face it, they've had some pretty good running backs, Chuck Moore and Nate Kamick, to name just a couple, Dan Pugh. These are all small college or small high school guys. I mean, Chuck Moore came from Mogador, which is a Division VI program.
Kamick came from Delta, which is a Division IV, Division V program.
Dan Pugh came from Norwalk St. Paul. So, I mean, these aren't huge football programs these guys are coming out of, but Mount has had a penchant for finding them. They've got 8 starters coming back on defense. They're led by All-American senior defensive lineman Mike Vidal, who has 12.5 sacks, or had 12.5 sacks last year. And he's joined up front by seniors Adam Mochai and Elijah Berry. So, they return their top 5 tacklers on defense. I think they're going to be pretty solid on defense.
Yeah, and usually their top tackler only has about 75 tackles.
Because one plays half the game.
They play half the game, and to get tackles at Mountain Union, you have to be the first one to the football because the first guy's usually going to make the tackle.
Yep.
So their defense is obviously they put up 50, 60 points on people, but their defense is usually kind of what keys that because they just force so many turnovers. They've had countless National Defensive Player of the Years just go through their program, and that's something that's going to continue. I think Mike Vidal, this year is going to have upwards of 20 sacks, which is unbelievable. I think he'll be the Defensive Player of the Year.
He'll be the Jason Tresnick for Mount Union, as Tresnick led Ohio Northern years ago. And as Greg was talking about, to put this in perspective, Greg and I happened to be at the game prior to this John Carroll loss this year, which was 2005.
2005, yeah.
We were down in Alliance, and we watched Ohio Northern upset Mount Union. And then, so that's 7 or 12 years later before they lose another conference game. So it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around that, but...
yeah, I think they won 105 consecutive conference games in a row.
Yeah, and if you ever get a chance to look at through Mountain Union's record book, and you look at like Larry Karras's, the retired Larry Karras's record, it's like 325 and 24 or something like that.
And that day in 2005, I challenge anybody to see some of the better football games what we saw. We had Mount Union, later that couple years later, we saw Mount Union play in the national semifinals and blow teams' doors off. Then we went to Massillon and saw a state championship game, Coldwater and Mooney, I think it was.
It was a great
greatest finish I've ever seen. Then we went over to Canton and we saw Menor and St. X.
Yeah, St. X.
We
froze to death.
That Menor team, the junior linebacker was I can't think of his name, but the kid that plays for Carolina Panthers right now, went to Boston College. So
Kuechly.
Yeah, Luke Kuechly. Yeah. So we've seen some pretty good football out in Stark County.
Yeah, you can't necessarily say we're the most sane people when we do stuff like that, but
no.
So that's the OAC preview. That's where we're at with that. If you get a chance, well, we didn't make our prediction on Mount Union. So how do you see Mount Union going, Greg?
10-0, 9-0 in the conference. I see them getting back to the national championship. I think just because of what happened last year, I can see them winning it this year.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're going to be pushed too hard during the conference season because of what happened last year.
They'll be on a mission.
They will be, yes, absolutely.
And I pick Mount going undefeated in the conference. 10-0 during the regular season, and I have them 15-0 overall, which means if you know anything about Division III playoffs, you win 5, you're national champs, and I see Mount Union do that. Of course, Marion Hardin-Baylor, who was the team that actually it took them until the fourth quarter to beat Mount Union last year. Marion Hardin-Baylor is the favorite, although they've lost some key components from that team.
Yeah, I know their current poll, D3Football.com, has them ranked number 1, Mount Union number 2, Ohio Northern number 37, so they got some votes, and then John Carroll number 8. So right now the OAC has 3 teams in the top receiving votes. But Mary Hardin-Baylor, it's going to be...
I think they lost their quarterback, and I think that's always... maybe they're to the level of Mount Union, I guess, but that's a hard thing to replace when you lose your quarterback, especially coming off a national title. Marion Hardin-Baylor is not in the same sentence yet with Mount Union and Wisconsin Whitewater.
No, they're not. They've
been close.
They've been close, but they just can't. The consistency is not there. To be as consistent as Whitewater or Mount has been, that's a tall task, but they're usually that second tier, that second-rung team. St. Thomas has had some really good teams. Oshkosh has had some really good teams. So they just can't quite, in St. John's, they just can't quite build that year to year.
And let's face it, last year the NCAA put the bolts to Mount Union. They put them on the road for every game. Now, in fairness, they have played like 20 years in a row home games until
they get to
the national championship.
The Stag Bowl.
but they played every game on the road and were a game away from going back to the national championship.
Yeah, to be the best, you have to beat the best. And last year, Mount Union just came up a game short of getting there. But like I said, I think this year they're going to be up for the challenge with all their. They have a lot of returning starters this year, which is not usually the case for Mount Union because it's hard to break into their. Let's be honest, it's hard to break into their starting lineup as an underclassman. But this year they have had several. They have three kids that are juniors this year that were all conference as sophomores last year. So 2 in the secondary, 1 at linebacker. So they're going to have a lot of experience coming back on the defensive side of the ball. You have the Mahochi kid. You have the other defensive tackle returning, the Vidal. They're going to be stout up front.
Yeah, and Mount Union they play their 5 home games. In the regular season. Of course, they traditionally have played 4 home games in the playoffs. With the championship game in a couple years moving to Canton, Mount Union might be the first team to play 10 home games.
Yeah, it's going to. Yeah, they don't have to travel very far. Alliance to Canton's not too far at all.
Not far at all. I mean, that's half hour they're going to be sitting at the stadium. So it'll be an exciting year in the OAC. You owe it to yourself to get out, watch Wilmington College locally. They will be playing the Mount Union Purple Raiders at home this year. So if you're curious to see what Mount Union's about, stop out there.
And especially in Wilmington, like we've said, they're going to face a lot of challenges being in this conference. Just they don't have the depth right now. But week 1, on September 2nd, they do host Earlham at 1:30. So that should be a really good game because, like we said, both those programs are they're in similar situations, similar struggles. So if you come on out 1:30, watch Wilmington. That could be their first win that they've had in a few years, and it'll be a good stepping stone for Coach Moore and his staff and the players that they have over there.
Yeah, I would say when we look at Saturday, September 14th. That will be Marietta at Wilmington. That is a 2:00 start. And I would say that could be, that'd be a good game. Again, that was my criteria for picking Wilmington over Marietta, as Marietta's traveling out to Wilmington, and then we'll see what happens with that. But get out and watch the Quakers, support them. There's a lot of good Division III college football. And of course, we're doing the game of the week this year, Greg, and we've got some interesting games. We didn't get all the games we wanted. We're still waiting to find out if we're going to get to do the Mount Union John Carroll game, which could be for all the marbles, could potentially be for the number 1 seed in the playoffs.
And it's the final weekend of the season, too. Mount Union at John Carroll, Saturday, November 11th.
Yeah. So if you're not doing anything, want to drive up to Cleveland, that'll be a pretty good football game, I have a feeling.
Yeah, or you can head on out to Muskingum. Wilmington's playing there, so that's another one of those games where Wilmington's got a fighting chance of breaking into the win column.
Yeah, so, good games out there. Of course, we were talking about the OAC, but you have the North Coast Athletic Conference, which is, for the most part, pretty much dominated by on most years by Wittenberg.
The Berg.
But then there's Wabash over in Indiana and so there's some good teams there. You have the Heartland Conference with Mount St.
You have
Joseph.
Mount St. Joe, you have Defiance, and you have Bluffton, the 3 Ohio teams. You have Hanover just across the border in Indiana, down kind of toward Louisville. You have Anderson, Indiana. So again, it's not the OAC, but there's some good teams. Franklin and Indiana. There's some pretty solid programs.
Franklin's pretty good. They've made the playoffs several years and even given Mount Union a pretty good run a couple times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then we have Cincinnati Christian University in their second year, and they, I'm sure Coach Riley. Now they're in the NAIA, which has their own playoff system in that, and so that'll be exciting for them as they build that program. Facilities is probably the biggest problem for them right now.
Yeah, and that's the thing with the NAIA programs. is trying to get those facilities up there. You had Urbana started to get things turned around there. They went Division II. Ohio Dominican, really great facilities there. Division II in Columbus. So there's plenty of football in the state of Ohio on Saturdays. Because let's be honest, not everybody can get up to the Horseshoe. Not everybody can afford to get up to the Horseshoe. It's pretty expensive.
For $6 or $7, you can go to a Division III game.
And then not too far down the road, down 71, down south, you have Cincinnati and Nippert Stadium. You have Coach Fickle and the Bobcats. The Bearcats, not Bobcats. That's OU. Cincinnati Bearcats.
He's in the green mode there.
Wrong cat. Wrong kitty. But you have Coach Fickle, and I think he's going to be able to do some pretty successful things here in Cincinnati.
I think the thing where Fickle could be successful, especially from a recruiting standpoint, is with Urban, and I'm not being critical of Urban Meyer by any means, because he has the ability to bring the best 25 or 30 football players each year into Columbus. We just have to put our ego on the shelf and realize, yes, Ohio does have great football players, but like Urban said, if I can get 30 number one draft choices, then I'm going to take 30 number one draft choices.
Yeah, he doesn't care where they come from. So a lot of these Ohio kids are Ohio State's kind of overlooking them because they're not the 5-star recruits and some of them the 4-star recruits. So, kids like A.J. Hawk wouldn't have been recruited by Ohio State.
Right.
Nick Mangold wouldn't have been recruited by Ohio State. Bobby Carpenter probably would have because he was a 4 or 5-star recruit, but Luke Fickle is not going to overlook those kids. So you have those type kids that are maybe a 2-3-star recruit that just blossom in college that they're not going to get a shot at Ohio State.
Right.
But Cincinnati Bearcats, they'll try to snatch them up.
Yeah, and if the kid doesn't really want to travel, a lot of times it comes, and you see this with Ohio State's recruiting. A lot of times when they talk to the kids, my mom doesn't want me going that far away from home, or my grandpa went to Georgia Tech or wherever it is in the South, wherever they're coming from. And that's where, you run into that situation in Ohio where Cincinnati becomes that option where, I didn't get that scholarship to Ohio State. But Cincinnati, and we've talked about this before, Cincinnati before long, and I would still believe this and stand by this, will be a member of the Big 12. I just really believe that's where they're headed with the upgrades of their stadium and that.
Yeah, and I think they've made it known, a lot of their fan base, they want to be a part of the Big Ten. But as long as Ohio State's in the Big Ten, there will not be another Ohio team in the Big Ten. It's just what Ohio State says pretty much goes to the big dog on the block. And I don't think Cincinnati, I think that would be a detriment to their program to try to join the Big Ten. They're built more like the Big 12, like with West Virginia.
Right.
Schools like that, which they're familiar playing against some of them. So I think the Big 12 would be a natural fit for them. I think you're right, and I think in the next few years with the way things are going, the AAC, that's going to eventually fall apart with all this conference realignment and all these things, absolutely. And the Big 12 has to do something, and Cincinnati is one of those teams that they could lure over with the money.
Well, I think Cincinnati, let's face it, one of the biggest problems for the Big 12 is that they have one really major TV market, which is Austin, Texas. And so beyond that, they do not have the markets that the Big Ten has, the SEC, the ACC, obviously the Pac-12. So what they've got to look at is where they can go from a recruiting standpoint, and what better area to get into the Midwest. They've tapped in with West Virginia. Well, Cincinnati would be a great rivalry game for those two, and that gets Oklahoma, Iowa State, Kansas into the backyard of the Buckeyes and gives them at least a shot at getting players out of here.
Yeah, because it's not Ohio State can go into Texas and pluck some kids. It's very rare that you see Texas, any of these Pac-12 schools, Big 12 schools, getting anybody from Ohio. It's very rare that you see that. But if you get Cincinnati, you get some of these Kentucky kids, Northern Kentucky kids, and you get some of the Ohio kids, and then you can start to build. Texas is Texas. They're going to be able to recruit nationally, especially with Coach Herman there now. But some of these other programs, like you said, how many kids in Ohio want to go play at Kansas? or want to go play at Iowa State. Now, Iowa State now has the Ohio connection with Mount Union.
And
you have
Matt
Northeast
Campbell
Ohio,
there.
Northwest Ohio. So they've got that recruiting base into Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania also. So Iowa State's going to get that recruiting base. But a lot of these other schools, they just don't have that.
And I think that a school like Iowa State, because of the fact that they have an Ohio connection in their coaching staff, would love to see Cincinnati come in, because then they can sell to the kids, well, your mom and dad are going to get to see you play. When we come to Cincinnati, they can come down and watch you play here. So I think Iowa State, it kind of sounds backwards, but I think Iowa State would really invite the idea of Cincinnati coming into the conference.
No, absolutely. And we're going to have more conference realignment.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of who and when. I think we're going to get down to just a few big conferences, and Cincinnati wants to be at the front of it, not at the rear of it.
And I think the problem for the Big 12 is the Big 12 can be the one that could be broken up and absorbed if they don't make a move. It will not be a Power 5, it'll be a Power 4, and that's where they're going to have to make that decision on what they want to do. The Big 10, and rightfully so, some people would look at, well, there is no rational reason to bring Rutgers into the league. We've talked about that at length, other than recruiting and TV market. But the product, you've hurt the product that you have. Now, on the other hand, if the Big Ten were to court Oklahoma, who has a very strong, rich football tradition, national titles, they have Nebraska in the league, and one of the greatest rivalries of all time was Oklahoma-Nebraska. I can see Oklahoma being interested in the Big Ten. Now, everybody thinks from a football standpoint, but I think the one that everybody wouldn't be excited about from a football aspect would be Kansas.
But you bring the Jayhawk basketball program in, that's like getting North Carolina. Like we said when all the realignments started happening, we were hoping that the ACC, that
the Tar Heels would be.
Ohio or the Big Ten would try to get North Carolina, not necessarily for their football, but because their basketball program.
But their football was better than, when you look at their football program in comparison to Maryland and Rutgers.
Can I quote you on this?
Yes, you can quote me on this. That would have been an upgrade across the board. And, I wish we could get like a mulligan on Rutgers and say we made a mistake there. We're going to, we'll set this up so you guys can go to the MAC.
Yeah, you know what? Even Duke, because Duke's awful in football.
Yeah.
But at least in basketball, that's it. Rutgers, they had, Greg Schiano, they had a couple of really good years.
Yes.
But that's it. They haven't done anything besides those 3, 4, 5 years in their history.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a befuddling situation why the Big Ten did that. But, I think the Big 12 has to be extremely worried. They are not doing smart things, although they do have a conference game this year, so they're going to play a true round robin. That means with a 10-team league, you play 9 league games, and then the top 2 teams will play for the title. That means it's a rematch.
Yeah, so if you lose the team you already beat and you both have the one loss against each other, who's the champion? The one that won the most recent one, I guess? Their big downfall was when the Texas Longhorn Network, when Texas said, we're doing this on our own, we don't want it, and the Big 12 just said, okay, go ahead. That was a huge detriment. Ohio State could have done the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
But the administration realized that's not good for the conference. We need to kind of...
Because you want a strong conference.
Absolutely. And Texas thought, well, it's never going to matter. Well, it has.
And even Texas's name is floated, from afar with an affiliation for the Big Ten. And then people say, well, why? Why would Texas? Well, again, it's recruiting. It's being part of the Big Ten network. Texas isn't going to give up the Longhorn network unless they know the slice of the pie is going to be at least as big as what they're getting.
And if you look at what Rutgers doesn't want to leave the Big Ten. Look how much money they get every year just from the Big Ten network.
For doing nothing.
It'd be different
for being a doormat.
if they're relevant in something.
Right.
in something, basketball, and that's kind of the reason why Maryland came in, because Maryland has had some pretty good basketball.
Maryland's got a
programs.
national title in
And
basketball.
even in football, they've had some decent years.
And what people might not know, and it's an up-and-coming sport, Maryland is the national
Lacrosse.
champs in lacrosse.
Yeah.
Beat
And-
the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and you have Ohio State that's really good. Johns Hopkins in the Big Ten for that. I mean, it's just, again, that makes sense. You bring these schools in, but
What do you think about Notre Dame, Greg? I mean, does Notre Dame continue this charade with the ACC, or do they eventually just say, man, we sit there between, Chicago and West Lafayette, and just
they're in the heart of Big Ten country.
right?
They're nowhere near ACC country. It's an ego thing.
Is it
And-
that they don't want to have to recruit against Ohio State and Michigan State is
because they can't.
well, and that could be it. That could be it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think eventually they're going to have to, just because I think the ACC. I mean, the ACC is not in any dire straits right now.
No.
But if you look at it, Big Ten versus ACC, the money financially is there for the Big Ten. Notre Dame has NBC, but that's not as lucrative as it once was. And I understand 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, it made sense for Notre Dame to stay independent because of all the money revenue that they generated from NBC playing every weekend on TV. I get that. Now, everybody's on TV.
Yeah, and it almost makes sense when we talked about those other Big 12 schools, and especially like Oklahoma and Texas. It almost makes sense that Notre Dame would jump to the Big Ten from the ACC, and the ACC might look at one of those schools because although they're not Atlantic Coast, but they're still more southern, geographically than the schools that.
They're more
Well, than
geographical
Notre Dame.
than Notre Dame. I
Right.
mean, like I said, Notre Dame. It makes sense but it's an ego thing.
It is.
And
That's what Notre Dame's always been driven by.
And I would like to see Notre Dame in the Big Ten, just because of. I don't know how often they'd be able to compete on a regular basis. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? You've stiffed the Big Ten for this many years. Just, stay on the outside.
Yeah.
But I think Notre Dame as a name recognition.
Well, they could beat Rutgers. We know that.
Well, I hope. But I think name recognition, Notre Dame should be. The Big Ten would want Notre Dame just because
the brand
Absolutely.
is good. Well, Greg, we are about a minute from signing off here. Thanks for coming down in studio. The Fuga and the Razor,
it's
you
good
got
to
it
be
on
in
here.
Yeah, it's good to be in here because the IQ level went up a few points when I show up. The knowledge of
Charlie's not going to like that.
well, like I said, the knowledge of baseball certainly goes up.
Well, it does. It does.
I learned something today with tennis.
Yeah,
I
didn't expect
think-
that, did you?
It's interesting. I've always liked tennis. Unfortunately, you don't get to see the top tennis players in high school. They're usually playing in, their travel things and things like that. But yeah, it's interesting.
And for those that were expecting the Wilmington cheerleaders, I did talk to them today. They apologized. They said it will be easier for them to come in, Rick, once school starts and they can get them all together. So we have postponed that for a couple weeks, and the Wilmington College cheerleading squad will come in and put on a little show for us, hopefully, do a little routine, and we'll get that on camera. So for Rick Phillips on the board, my partner Greg the Fuga Henning, and Bill the Razor Rayback, good night, everyone.
106.9 WZAA LP, Jeffersonville.